The story of the enchanted horse from the Arabian Nights. On the festival of Nowruz, which is the first day of the year of this spring, the Sultan of Shiraz was just concluding his public audience when a Hindu appeared at the foot of the throne with an artificial horse, so spiritedly modelled that at first sight he was taken for a living animal. The Hindu prostrated himself before the throne, and pointing to the horse, said to the Sultan, "The horse is a great wonder. If I wish to be transported to the most distant part of the earth, I have only to mount him. I offer to show you, your Majesty, this wonder if you command me." The Sultan, who was very fond of everything that was curious, and who had never beheld or heard anything quite so strange as this, told the Hindu that he would like to see him perform what he had promised. The Hindu at once put his foot into the stirrup, swung himself into the saddle, and asked the Sultan whether he wished him to go. "Do you see yonder mountain?" said the Sultan, pointing to it. "Ride your horse there. Bring me a branch from the palm tree that grows at the foot of the hill." No sooner had the Sultan spoke than the Hindu turned a peg, which was in the hollow of the horse's neck, just by the pommel of the saddle. Instantly the horse rose from the ground and bore his rider into the air with the speed of lightning, to the amazement of the Sultan and all the spectators. Within less than a quarter of an hour they saw him returning with the palm branch in his hand. All lighting amidst the acclamations of the people, he dismounted and approached the throne, laid the palm branch at the Sultan's feet. The Sultan still marvelled at this unheard of sight. He was filled with a great desire to possess the horse, and said to the Hindu, "I will buy him off you if he is for sale." "Sire," replied the Hindu, "there is only one condition on which I will part with my horse, namely the hand of the princess, your daughter, as my wife." The courtiers surrounding the Sultan's throne could not restrain their laughter at the Hindu's extravagant proposal, but Prince Firuzshah, the Sultan's eldest son, was very indignant. "Sire," said he, "I hope that you will at once refuse this impudent demand, and not allow this miserable juggler to flatter himself for a moment with the hope of a marriage with one of the most powerful houses in the world. Think what you owe to yourself and to your noble blood." "My son," replied the Sultan, "I will not grant him what he asks, but putting my daughter, the princess, out of the question, I may make a different bargain with him. First, however, I wish you to examine the horse. Try him yourself and tell me what you think of him." On hearing this, the Hindu eagerly ran forward to help the prince mount and show him how to guide and manage the horse. But without waiting for the Hindu's assistance, the prince mounted and turned the peg as he had seen the other do. Instantly the horse darted into the air, swift as an arrow shot from a bow, and in a few moments neither horse nor prince could be seen. The Hindu, alarmed at what had happened, threw himself before the throne and begged the Sultan not to be angry. "Your Majesty," he said, "saw as well as I with what speed the horse flew away. The surprise took away my power of speech, but even if I had spoken to advise him, he was already too far away to hear me. There is still room to hope, however, that the prince will discover that there is another peg, and as soon as he turns that, the horse will cease to rise and will descend gently to the ground." Notwithstanding these arguments, the Sultan was much alarmed at his son's evident danger, and said to the Hindu, "Your head shall answer for my son's life, unless he returns safe in 3 months' time, or unless I hear that he is alive." He then ordered his officers to secure the Hindu and keep him a close prisoner, after which he retired to his palace, sorrowing that the festival of Nowruz had ended so unluckily. Meanwhile, the prince was carried through the air with a fearful rapidity. In less than an hour he had mounted so high that the mountains and plains below him all seemed to melt together. Then, for the first time, he began to think of returning, and to this end he began turning the peg, first one way and then the other, and the same time pulling upon the bridle. But when he found that the horse continued to ascend, he was greatly alarmed, and deeply repented of his folly in not learning to guide the horse before he mounted. He now began to examine the horse's neck and head very carefully, and discovered behind the right ear a second peg, smaller than the first. He turned this peg, and presently felt that he was descending in the same oblique manner as he had mounted, but not so swiftly. Night was already approaching when the prince discovered and turned the small peg, and as the horse descended he gradually lost sight of the sun's last setting rays, until presently it was quite dark. He was obliged to let the bridle hang loose, and wait patiently for the horse to choose his own landing place, whether it might be in the desert, in the river, or on the sea. At last, about midnight, the horse stopped upon solid ground, and the prince dismounted, faint with hunger, for he had eaten nothing since the morning. He found himself on the terrace of a magnificent palace, and groping about, he presently reached a staircase which led down into an apartment, the door of which was half open. The prince stopped and listened at the door, then advanced cautiously into the room, and by the light of the lamp saw a number of black slaves sleeping with their naked swords behind them. This was evidently the guard chamber of some sultan or prince. Yes. Advancing on tiptoe, he drew aside the curtain and saw a magnificent chamber, containing many beds, one of which was placed higher than the other, on a raised dais evidently the beds of the princess and her woman. He crept softly towards the dais, and beheld a beauty so extraordinary that he was charmed at the first sight. He fell on his knees and gently twitched the sleeve of the princess, who opened her eyes and was greatly surprised to see a handsome young man bending over her, yet showed no sign of fear. The prince rose to his feet, and bowing to the ground, said, "Beautiful princess, through a most extraordinary adventure you see at your feet a suppliant prince, son of the Sultan of Persia, who prays for your assistance and protection." In answer to this appeal of Prince Firoz Shah, the beautiful princess said, "Prince, you are not in a barbarous country, but in the kingdom of the Raj of Bengal. This is his country estate, and I am his eldest daughter. I grant you the protection that you ask, and you may depend upon my word." The Prince of Persia would have thanked the princess, but she would not let him speak. "Impatiently though I am," she said, "to know by what miracle you had come here from the capital of Persia, and by what enchantment you escaped the watchfulness of my guards. Yet I will restrain my curiosity until later, after you have rested from your fatigue." The princess women were much surprised to see a prince in her bedchamber, but they at once prepared to obey her command and conducted him into a handsome apartment. Here, while some prepared the bed, others brought and served a welcome and bountiful supper. The next day the princess prepared to receive the prince, and took more pains in dressing and adoring herself than she ever had done before. She decked her neck, head, and arms with the finest diamonds she possessed, and clothed herself in the richest fabrics of the Indies, of a most beautiful colour, and made only for kings, princesses, and princesses. After once more consulting her glass, she sent word to the Prince of Persia that she would receive him. The prince, who had just finished dressing when he received the princess's message, hastened to avail himself of the honour conferring on him. He told her of the wonders of the enchanted horse, of his wonderful journey through the air, and of the means by which he had gained entrance to her chamber. Then, after thanking her for her kind reception, he expressed a wish to return home and relieve the anxiety of the Sultan, his father. The princess replied, I cannot approve, Prince, of your leaving so soon. Grant me the favour of a somewhat longer visit, so that you may take back to the court of Persia a better account of what you have seen in the kingdom of Bengal. The prince could not well refuse the princess this favour. After the kindness, after the kindness she had shown him, and she busied herself with plans for hunting parties, concerts, and magnificent feasts to render his stay agreeable. For 2 whole months the Prince of Persia abandoned himself entirely to the will of the princess, who seemed to think that he had nothing to do but pass his whole life with her. But at last he declared that he could stay no longer, and begged leave to return to his father. And Princess, he added, if I were not afraid of giving offence, I would ask the favour of taking you with me. The princess made no answer to this address of the Prince of Persia, but her silence and downcast eyes told him plainly that she had no reluctance to accompany him. Her only fear, she confessed, was that the prince might not know well enough how to govern the horse. But the prince soon removed her fear by assuring her that after the experience he had had, he defied the Hindu himself to manage the horse better. Accordingly, they gave all their thoughts to planning how to get away secretly from the palace, without anyone having a suspicion of their design. The next morning, a little before daybreak, when all the attendants were still asleep, they made their way to the terrace of the palace. The prince turned the horse toward Persia, and as soon as the princess had mounted behind him and was well settled with her arms around his waist, he turned the peg. Whereupon the horse mounted into the air with his accustomed speed, and in 2 hours' time they came in sight of the Persian capital. Instead of alighting at the palace, the prince directed his course to the kiosk a little distance outside the city. He led the princess into a handsome apartment, ordered the attendant to provide her with whatever she needed, and told her that he would return immediately after informing his father of their arrival. Thereupon he ordered a horse to be brought and set out for the palace. The Sultan received his son with tears of joy, and listened eagerly while the prince related his adventures during his flight through the air. His kind reception at the palace of the Princess of Bengal, and his long stay there due to the mutual affection. He added that, having promised to marry her, he had persuaded her to accompany him to Persia. I brought her with me on the enchanted horse, he concluded, and left her in your summer place till I could return and assure her of your consent. Upon hearing these words, the Sultan embraced his son a second time, and said to him, my son, I will not only consent to your marriage with the Princess of Bengal, but will myself go and bring her to the palace, and your wedding shall be celebrated this very day. The Sultan ordered that the Hindu should be released from prison and brought before him. When this was done, the Sultan said, I held you prisoner, that your life might answer for that of the prince, my son. Thanks be to God, he has returned in safety. Go take your horse and never let me see your face again. The Hindu had learned of those who brought him from prison all about the princess whom Prince Feroz Shah had brought with him and left at the kiosk. And at once he began to think of revenge. He mounted his horse and flew directly to the kiosk, where he told the captain of the guards that he came with orders to conduct the Princess of Bengal through the air to the Sultan, who awaited her in the great square of his palace. The captain of the guard, seeing that the Hindu had been released from prison, believed his story, and the princess at once consented to do what the prince, as she thought, desired of her. The Hindu, overjoyed at the ease with which his wicked plan was succeeding, mounted his horse, took the princess up behind him, turned the peg, and instantly the horse mounted into the air. Meanwhile, the Sultan of Persia, attended by his court, was on the road to the kiosk where the Princess of Bengal had been left. When the prince himself had hurried on ahead to prepare the princess to receive his father, suddenly the Hindu, to brave them both and avenge himself for the ill treatment he had received, appeared over their heads with his prize. When the Sultan saw the Hindu, his surprise and anger were all the more keen because it was out of his power to punish his outrageous act. He could only stand and hurl 1,000 maledictions at him, as did also the courtiers who had witnessed the unquarrelled piece of insolence. But the grief of the Prince Firoz Shah was indescribable. When he beheld the Hindu hearing away the princess, who he loved so passionately, he made his way, melancholy and broken-hearted, to the kiosk, where he had last taken leave of the princess. Here, the captain of the guard, who had already learned of the Hindu's treachery, threw himself at the prince's feet and condemned himself to die by his own hand, because of his fatal cruelty. Rise, said the prince, I blame not you, but my own want of precaution for the loss of my princess. But lose no time. Bring me a dervish robe, and take care that you give no hint that it is for me. When the captain of the guard had procured the dervish robe, the prince at once disguised himself in it, and taking with him a box of jewels, left the palace, resolved not to return until he had found the princess, or perish in the attempt. Meanwhile, the Hindu mounted on his enchanted horse, with the princess behind him, arrived at the captain of the kingdom of Kashmir. He did not enter the kingdom, but alighted in a wood, and left the princess on a grassy spot close to a rivulet of fresh water, while he went to seek food. On his return, and after he and the princess had partaken of refreshments, he began to maltreat the princess because she refused to become his wife. Now it happened that the Sultan of Kashmir and his court were passing through the wood on their return from hunting, and hearing a woman's voice calling for help, went to rescue her. The Hindu, with great impudence, asked what business anyone had to interfere, since the lady was his wife. Whereupon the princess cried out, My lord, whoever you are, whom heaven has sent to my assistance, have compassion on me. I am a princess. This Hindu is a wicked magician who has forced me away from my prince of Persia, whom I was to marry, and has brought me hither on the enchanted horse that you see there. The princess's beauty, majestic air, and tears all declared that she spoke the truth. Justly enraged at the Hindu's insolence, the Sultan of Kashmir ordered his guards to seize him and strike off his head, which sentence was immediately carried out. The princess's joy was unbounded at finding herself rescued from the wicked Hindu. She supposed that the Sultan of Kashmir would at once restore her to the Prince of Persia, but she was much deceived in these hopes, for her rescuer had resolved to marry her himself the next day, and issued a proclamation commanding the general rejoicing in the inhabitants. The Princess of Bengal was awakened at break of day by drums and trumpets, and sounds of joy throughout the palace, but was far from guessing the true cause when the Sultan came to wait upon her. He explained that these rejoicings were in honour of their marriage, and begged her to consent to the union. On hearing this, the princess fainted away. The serving women who were present ran to her assistance, but it was long before they could bring her back to consciousness. When at last she recovered, she resolved that sooner than be forced to marry the Sultan of Kashmir, she would pretend that she had gone mad. Accordingly, she began to talk wildly, and show other signs of a disordered mind, even springing from her seat as if to attack the Sultan, so that he became greatly alarmed and sent for all the court physicians to ask if they could cure her of her disease. When he found that his court physicians could not cure her, he sent for the most famous doctor in the kingdom, who had no better success. Next, he sent word to the courts of neighbouring sultans with promises of generous reward to anyone who could cure her malady. Physicians arrived from all parts and tried their skill, but none could boast of success. Meanwhile, Prince Feroz Shah, disguised as a dervish, travelled through many provinces and towns, everywhere inquiring about his lost princess. At last, in the certain city of Hindustan, he learned of the princess of Bengal, who had gone mad on the day of her intended marriage with the Sultan of Kashmir. Convinced that there could be but one princess of Bengal, he hastened to the capital of Kashmir, and upon arriving was told the story of the princess and the fate of the Hindu magician. The prince was now convinced that he had at last found the beloved object of his long search. Providing himself with that distinctive dress of a physician, he went boldly to the palace and announced his wish to be allowed to attempt the cure of the princess. Since it was now some time since any physician had offered himself, the Sultan had begun to lose hope of ever seeing the princess cured, though he still wished to marry her. So he at once ordered the new physician to be brought before him, and upon the prince being admitted, told him that the princess could not bear the sight of a physician without falling into the most violent paroxysms. Accordingly, he conducted the prince to a closet from which he might see her through a lattice without himself being seen. There Feroz Shah beheld his lovely princess sitting in hopeless sorrow, the tears flowing from her beautiful eyes, while she sang a plaintive air deploring her unhappy fate. Upon leaving the closet, the prince told the Sultan that he had assured himself that the princess's complaint was not incurable, but that if he was to aid her, he must speak with her in private and alone. The Sultan ordered the princess' chamber door to be opened, and Feroz Shah went in. Immediately the princess resorted to her old practice of meeting physicians with threats and indications of attacking them. But Feroz Shah came close to her and said in so low a voice that only she could hear, "Princess, I am not a physician, but Feroz Shah, and have come to obtain your liberty." The princess, who knew the sound of his voice and recognized him, notwithstanding he had let his beard grow so long, grew calm at once, and was filled with secret joy at the unexpected sight of the prince she loved. After they had briefly informed each other of all that had happened since their separation, the prince asked if she knew what had become of the horse after the death of the Hindu magician. She replied that she did not know, but supposed that he was carefully guarded as a curiosity. Firoz Shah then told the princess that he intended to obtain and use the horse to convey them both back to Persia, and they planned together as the first step to this end that the princess the next day should receive the Sultan. On the following day, the Sultan was overjoyed to find that the princess's cure was apparently far advanced, and regarded the prince as the greatest physician in the world. The Prince of Persia, who accompanied the Sultan on his visit to the princess, inquired of him how she had come into the kingdom of Kashmir from her far distant country. The Sultan then repeated the story of the Hindu magician, adding that the enchanted horse was kept safely in his treasury as a great curiosity, though he knew not how to use it. Sire, replied the pretended physician, this information afforded me a means of curing the princess. When she was brought hither on the enchanted horse, she contracted part of the enchantment, which can be dispelled by a certain incense, of which I have knowledge. Let the horse be brought tomorrow into the great square before the palace, and leave the rest to me. I promise to show you and all the assembled people, in a few moments' time, the Princess of Bengal completely restored in body and mind. But to assure the success of what I propose, the princess must be dressed as magnificently as possible and adorned with the most valuable jewellery in your treasury. All this the Sultan eagerly promised, for he would have undertaken far more difficult things to assure his marriage. The next day the enchanted horse was taken from the treasury and brought to the great square before the palace. The rumour of something extraordinary having spread through the town, crowds of people flocked thither from all sides. The Sultan of Kashmir, surrounded by his nobles and ministers of state, occupied a gallery erected for the purpose. The Princess of Bengal, attended by her ladies in waiting, went up to the enchanted horse, and the woman helped her to mount. The pretended physician then placed around the horse many vessels full of burning charcoal, into which he cast handfuls of incense, after which he ran 3 times around the horse, pretending to utter certain magic words. The pot sent forth a dark cloud of smoke that surrounded the princess, so that neither she nor the horse could be seen. The prince mounted nimbly behind her and turned the peg, and as the horse rose with them into the air, the Sultan distinctly heard these words: Sultan of Kashmir, when you would marry princesses who implore your protection, learn first to obtain their consent. Thus the prince delivered the princess of Bengal, and carried her that same day to the capital of Persia, where the Sultan, his father, made immediate preparation for this solemnization of their marriage, with all fitting pomp and magnificence. After the day's appointment for rejoicing were over, the Sultan named and appointed an ambassador to go to the Raj of Bengal to ask his approval of the alliance contracted by this marriage, which the Raj of Bengal took as an honour and granted with great pleasure.